morning. Thank you for being here as we continue our study of the book of Romans. Before we begin today, let's go to God in prayer. Dear Father in heaven, thank you so much for this wonderful day that you've given to us, this first day of the week that you've asked us to meet together as your people. I pray that as we meet together that we will praise and honor you. I pray that our hearts will be open so that we'll receive your word with joy. And I pray that the power of your word will mold us and make us into your faithful and obedient servants. Dear Father, at this time, I ask that you be with so many who need you, whether it's physical needs, emotional needs, spiritual needs. I pray that you'll be with them, that you will strengthen and encourage them, that you'll heal them if it's your will, but please bless them and comfort them. Dear Father, I pray that you use each one of us in that process, and that we'll see how you will want to use us, and that we will help in that strength and support and encouragement, that we'll be there for them in their time of need. Dear Father, help us in all that we do in this life to glorify you. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, we're continuing our study of chapter 1. Last week we ended with verse 16 and 17. It says, "For I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, and also the Greek. For in it," which is the gospel, "for in the gospel, this good news that we have from God, the righteousness of God is revealed." So we can find out how to live right according to God and how God is right in what he does through this word that he's given us. From faith, for faith. From the beginning of the faith, we just begin to believe until our faith is complete at the end of this life. As it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. What two powerful verses that we have in the Bible. And that's where we ended last week. Today we'll begin in verse 18, and everything changes. The whole tone changes in what he's been saying. So far, he's kind of been very encouraging and uplifting and saying, hey, your faith is known throughout the world, and I can't wait to come and see you. I'm excited to share the gospel with you. I can't wait till we get to encourage each other mutually. It's this mutual encouragement that both of us get to give each other. This is going to be a great thing when I get to come see you, and I'm excited about it. Then he talks about the wrath of God. He says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth." Who is the wrath of God against? The same ones that are making it difficult on these people. So I'm glad you said that, because we got to look at this two different ways. Because one, he's wanting them to understand that the wrath of God is going to be against those people who are persecuting them, who are making it tough on them. We talked about how 5 years before, I guess it's actually now 7 or 8 years before, that the emperor kicked all the Jews out. And now that the Jews are coming back, and there's a little bit of tension and hardship through that, and that's what we'll see throughout this book. But he's saying, hey, all this is happening to those people. But it's not just those people. It's still the ungodly and unrighteous. Let me stop right there for just a minute. Sometimes we want to look at a verse like that, and we only want to say that the wrath of God is against ungodliness and unrighteousness. And we don't want to tie that to people. Almost that statement that you hear, and I agree with the statement, but we almost kind of lessen the consequences by when we say things like, hate the sin and love the sinner. And that's right, we should love the sinner, I get that. But sometimes when we apply that to our lives, we almost say, God hates the sin in my life, but he loves me, so we're good. And instead of really understanding that when I continue to sin and when I continue to give into that, the wrath of God is upon me because of the sin in my life, the sin that I choose, that I keep going into and I dig deeper into. He said, when you get to that point, you got to understand the feeling that God has about these people in this situation. He's mad. He cannot believe that the people that he created would act this way. And the wrath of God is revealed from heaven. He does take it personally because we're his creation. You know, it's kind of how you feel when your child constantly does something you've told them not to do. You know, the first time it's like, I get it. We all make mistakes. Hey, don't do that again. Second time it's like, hold on just a second. Did you just do it again? And when I told you not to do it? And all of a sudden they do it again. And it's like, I begin to take it personal. We're going to stop this. We're going to stop it right now. God feels the same way about us. He understands the way that Satan's coming after us. He understands that we're weak and feeble. But you know what? At some point in time, he's sitting there going, do you love me at all? Because you continue down this path of sin. You're choosing this, but not only you choose it, you're really spitting in my face because you say, I don't even care about you because I choose this instead. And at some point in time, that anger of God is upon us. He goes on to say what the unrighteousness in our life causes. What does it cause? It causes us to what? Deny the truth, or what he says, suppress the truth. What that really means is I try to find ways to twist what the truth is to make it fit what I want it to say, to justify the sin in my life. And I'll keep pressing it and pressing it and pressing it until it's really no longer truth any longer. But in my mind, it's truth. I believe it with all my heart. You think about so many of our denominational friends out there. People who genuinely love God. I could go in any of those church buildings today and I could see the way that some of them are singing and the heart that is open, but there's part of the Word of God that they don't look at and they don't want to believe. They'll say, that's not really what God means here. I think God's changed since then. And we begin to suppress the truth. So much so that we believe it a certain way because we keep pressing against it. I don't want to believe it that way. Surely that's not what God means. I like it the way I want it to be. And don't just look at them. Look at your own life. And that's really a scary thought because how many of us have genuinely suppressed the truth to say, I'm not sure that's exactly what God meant here. Why? Because I'm tempted to do this or to do that, or really I can't help the emotions that I feel here, and I give in to those emotions of anger sometimes, and sometimes I want to hurt somebody else because they've hurt me, and surely God understands how I feel here. And I suppress the truth. We do that, don't we? It's that verse that really needs to open up our eyes and our hearts to, am I genuinely living the life God has asked me to live? And am I seeing His truth, or have I suppressed it to make it more into making me feel okay about how I'm living and who I am? And that's how we suppress the truth. Questions or comments about that? Did you notice that in verses 17 and 18? In 17, when we're still on the positive, it says the righteousness of God is revealed. In verse 18, it says the wrath of God is revealed. It's not just one time that it's revealed. It's in present tense. It's an ongoing revelation. It keeps going. God's righteousness is continuing to be revealed unto us through His Word and how He goes into action with His Word, fulfilling His promises that He has within His Word. That's where we see the righteousness of God, but the wrath of God is the same. The wrath of God continues to be upon us if we continue to sin. And we'll continue to see those consequences in this life and the life to come if we don't change. Those two things are constantly happening on God through His actions toward us. In verse 19 and 20 it says, for what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For His invisible attributes, namely His eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. How is God's eternal power and divine nature clearly perceived? It's really through creation. You know, how in the world do you imagine that people are outside when there's very little light outside, but then you look up at the night sky and see the stars in the sky? All the planets and the stars that are up there. when you genuinely think about that child that's been born to you, how did that just happen? How did God design this body to be so amazing? That we're able to have a heart that pumps blood throughout our system, and that we have the lungs that are able to breathe and push oxygen throughout our body. How in the world does something get designed like this? He said, if you just look around, no matter what, at the end of the day, you have to acknowledge there's a higher power out there, because it couldn't have just happened. I remember sitting in a Bible class at Lomax. We had a men's class, but there was this guy, and he was just brilliant. But he was able to help me to understand something. I never really understood the Big Bang Theory. And I may still butcher this story because I'm really not the best when it comes to science. But if I'm not mistaken, how he described it, he said, when you get all the way down to an atom, he said when scientists were able to break that apart, it caused this spark to happen. So in their mind, they were able to justify this Big Bang Theory that somehow these atoms, all of a sudden, all at once, just kind of broke apart, and because of whatever pressure, and it caused this giant explosion, and it kind of caused all this to start happening and just kind of evolve over millions of years. That all of a sudden we have all the planets, the stars, the water, the trees, the plants, the animals that grew into other animals and then eventually became man. He said, that's kind of how they justified it. He said, but what I've come to understand is how many scientists, when they sit there and they get all the way down back to that point of breaking that atom apart and nothing happens, it's a realization of that's not possible. We've been able to break these atoms apart. We've been able to do these things. We've seen all this, and nothing happens today when these atoms break apart and there's that spark. It should cause something to happen the same as it did back then. What is the famous scientist is it Hawkins, that used to believe in God but now no longer does? The realization of he was somebody in the science world, but because there was such pressure on him, unless you deny that God could have done all this, we're no longer going to value you. And so now it's like, okay, fine. I'll deny God because I need everybody to realize what a great scientist I am. Sometimes we give in to pressure, but even he, at one time in his life, acknowledged there's no possible way for us to have evolved over millions of years. It's not possible. All of that would have continued to happen. There's nothing in science that proves the Big Bang Theory. So, as we look at life, as we look at all these things around us, there's no way that we can't acknowledge that there's some higher power out there that had to have created something, to start something to make this real, because none of us have the ability to do that same thing. Questions or comments about that?
When he gets into the condemnation of the unrighteous, it seems like we should be able to somewhat understand that, because look around us at all this stuff happening. So the school systems and things that the teachers aren't able to discipline kids, and we've got all this stuff going on. And theirs was more, it was a persecution happening. But it was almost a relief to them, and I think him saying, hang in there, God's still in control, all this is going on, I know you're getting persecuted, it seems like the world's turning, but God is still here, he's still alive, and I think he is talking about those other people, they.
Yes.
So I'm talking about this group that he's in, but obviously, it's a warning, don't you be like them.
That's right.
But it seems to be a comfort to them saying, hang in there, nothing's changed, heaven's still there, God's still there, all this going on, that'll be taken, God will avenge. I think that was a positive thing for them to hear during a time that they've been so suppressed.
And thank you for drawing us back to that, because we can't lose sight of what Paul's message is here. Even though what I'm saying is trying to apply that to us today, the way that they were looking at this is this world, look at how they're benefiting from all the things that are going on in their life, and we're getting persecuted, we're getting torn down. why is this happening to us? I thought if we followed God, life would be easy and we'd have some relief here. Sometimes they just needed to know God's in control. He's got this. You got to understand the wrath of God is coming upon them, and He's going to take care of things. You stay true to who you are and what you believe in. God will take care of you. God will lead and guide you through these things that you're going through. And remember who you are and why you chose to be who you are. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the Sunday morning lesson too, about the persecution. Any other questions or comments about this? God says it says in 21 and 22, for although they knew God, they do not honor Him as God or give thanks to Him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools. Did you notice that it says, even though they knew God? These people that he's talking about, there are people out there who at least acknowledge there's a higher being, and some of them knew God. Some of these people that he's talking about were once a part of the church and have fallen away from the Lord's church. But what two things did they not do when they knew God? All right, so let's talk about those two things. What does it mean to truly honor God in our lives? What does that mean? Glorify Him. How do we do that, though? How can we glorify Him or honor Him in our life? What does that mean? Obedience. Really, it's as simple as that. When people see that I'm truly obedient, I'm going to do what He asked me to do, when He asked me to do it, how He asked me to do it. When people see that in our lives, it's our way of honoring and glorifying Him. Doesn't that mean that we have to sacrifice a lot of things that we like in this life? That's hard, isn't it? Why? Because I justify the way that I've lived life because I'm a good person and I'm better than most, and surely, God, that's going to be enough. And isn't it okay that I don't give you everything? I give you a lot. Isn't that good enough? It's like, no, I ask you to give me everything. Jason and I talked about it last week after service about what it means to be a slave. How many times Paul, even though we see that it's either servant or bondservant in a lot of translations, it was because when they translated, they knew what it meant to be a slave. And when people thought about being a slave, we sure don't want people to think they have to be a slave. But isn't that what he's asking out of us? To say, I give you everything. I give you complete control of my life. You've got complete authority. Whatever you want me to do, when you want me to do it, how you want me to do it, that's what I'm going to do, because that's what a slave does, because he understands the consequences of not. He says, God, I'm putting myself in that position for you in my life. Back in Deuteronomy, there were many slaves that gave themselves back to their masters. After, I think it was 7 years or so, many years anyways, I think it was 7, a slave was supposed to be let free. But if they wanted to be under the control of that master for the rest of their life, they would pierce their ear on the doorpost of that house to say, no, that's mine, I belong to him. That's who I belong to. Jesus is saying, that's what I want out of you. I want you to say, I'm your Lord and Master. I'm everything. I want you to honor me by the way that you live. Yes?
In my verse it said, they did not glorify him as God. And I think that's what we're seeing in our society. If we believe there's a God, but do we really think he is the God? And if you don't really believe in God, then there's no way you're going to follow his commandments. Why would you?
Yeah.
You know, you've got to first have the commitment, believe that it is our God, that's our Creator, he is in control, before we're going to submit to him. And like that they had to have a certain type of respect for them. But that's what we're seeing. I don't think a lot of people really believe deep down God is who he is, and so why follow him?
And I guess what you're saying there is really we need to verbalize why we do what we do. Because I do think a lot of people look at us and say, boy, they're a good person. They're nice. They care about people. But because we never acknowledge why we're doing it, because I'm a child of God, I do it because he asked me, and I want to glorify him. This isn't for my glorification. I don't want you to think any better about me. I want you to understand that I'm just a child of God. We got to do it to honor him. to glorify Him, making sure people are acknowledging that it's Him, why I live the way that I live. But then it goes into thanking God. What's so important about thanking God? Why would that be important in a Christian's life? It is. That's it. Remembering where our blessings come from. Remembering why I'm able to even do what I do. So many times we just want to kind of make it vague. Thank you for being our God. Thank you for the blessings you give us. Thank you. We honestly need to be naming those things. God, I want to thank you for giving me the courage to talk to so-and-so. God, I want to thank you for this specific blessing that you've given to me. I want to thank you for today and what you've done for me. And let me just list what you did for me today and how I acknowledge that. When I acknowledge all of those things, I realize it's not me any longer. I'm not some great person that can accomplish all these wonderful things. It's not me. It's God just working through me. And when I acknowledge that it's God working through me, giving me these talents and abilities and having these blessings in my life, then all of a sudden my life isn't revolving around me any longer. It's revolving around Him. Because when I don't honor Him, when I don't go out of my way to give Him the glory, and I don't thank Him for all these things in my life, it says there's 3 things that I wind up doing. I become futile in my thinking because so much of it still revolves around me. Their foolish hearts are darkened. My heart really just doesn't see God for who He is. Just what Mark was saying a minute ago. We don't really believe that God is who God is. If we did, we'd be different in how we viewed things and how we did things. But our hearts become dark. And then I claim to be wise. Look at who I am. Look at what all I've accomplished. And look at this great thing about me. But I'm really foolish because I'm putting it all back on me. I'm acting like I'm somebody. Do you know what I've noticed about all of us? Everybody out there, they can't do it all themselves. No matter how strong they are, no matter how smart and wise they are, they fall time and time again. Everybody. They've disappointed us time and time again. We've disappointed each other because we're limited on what we can do. But so much of it's still because we try to rely on ourselves. We talked a few weeks ago about being poor in spirit in the Beatitudes. That realization that I can't do it on my own. I have to have a full reliance on God to live for Him, to be the person He wants me to be, and Him, giving Him the ability to do all these great things through me and in me. Otherwise, all of a sudden I find myself turning against Him, limiting Him, and not letting Him be who He's supposed to be in my life.
Stacey mentioned something that He paid the price. He purchased us with His Son. And so that's a good reason to give thanks. He purchased us.
Yeah. And so I think that's a great point as well, is we shouldn't just be thankful for what He does for us on a daily basis, but the overall gift. That's a huge thing we never can lose sight of. We lose sight of that overall amazing gift that gives us that chance of salvation. We forget who we are on a daily basis as well. Other questions or comments?
I think we have to remember the first century Christians were few. Everyone was coming out of the pagan practices with multiple gods. You had fertility gods and harvest gods. So his comment, like Mark said, to honor Him as God, they were still trying to understand the concept of one true God.
And it had to be tough during that time because, and we see it through the Old Testament as well, how many times that people wanted to hold on to the old gods that the false gods that they had been worshiping, and then hold on to this new God, God Almighty. And it was hard sometimes when I'm struggling with things and my crop's not growing because it's not raining. Well, I'm going to call out to this new God that I like, but hey, you know, there's this God of the rain over here that I'd like to call out to Him too, just to make sure I'm not missing anything, because I'm not getting my crop in. They were still holding on to both sides, and that is some of the things that they were dealing with in the first century. And some of this is being addressed to that as well of, don't hold on to this. I know you're still drawn back to it. There's some things you want to hold on to, but you can't. Because that's not the way of God, and the wrath of God is against him, and it'll make you futile in who you are and what you want to believe, and it'll make you become a fool at the end of the day. In verse 23, it says, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. You know, they started worshiping these false gods, and they put them in the image of man. They made them to look enough like us that it's like, oh, that could be powerful. That could be somebody I want to look up to. They also worshipped animals. We see that all the way back in the Old Testament with Moses as they worshiped the golden calf, an image that they had gotten from the false gods of Egypt. We see in Asia that they will worship different types of dragons and creeping things. But, you know, don't we do that same thing today? What about yesterday? We worship sports. I watched probably more football than I should have yesterday. We get so engrossed in it sometimes that it dominates our conversation. It even dominates our thoughts. It dominates kind of who we are and what we want to accomplish. And it's not just sports. There's all kind of things. Some people are driven by technology. Some people are driven by possession. Some people, and we let it dominate what we look at, what we go after, what we try to buy next, how we can be a part of it. All of a sudden, we take the image of God and we replace it with things, people. And we make them or those things more important in our life. We got to watch what really is the most important thing. What's the priority in our life? He's saying, this is what's happening. People are giving up this idea of God for the things of the world. Questions or comments about that? Verses 24 and 25. Because they have done this, when it says therefore, it's leading into those verses before of all these things where they should have known who God was because he's presented himself to them many times in many ways, but they keep turning against, they keep hardening their heart. Because of this, God gave them up to the lust of their hearts, to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worship and serve the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. Have you ever thought, do we exchange the truth of God for a lie? Do we do that? Every time we sin, we do, don't we? How many times does Satan come at us saying, this is okay. You deserve this. God's not going to be that mad at you. Kind of like what he did with Eve. Did God really say that? How many times do we exchange the truth of God, something we know to be true, for a lie because we want it to be a certain way? Thinking surely God, a God of love, wouldn't be hard on us or wouldn't send us to hell because surely none of that would happen. That's not what he meant. Hey, you know what? 2,000 years ago when the Bible was written, hey, that was just a different time. Surely God didn't mean that for us. And aren't we questioning his wisdom and ability to know what could stand forever when we say that? But isn't that what we do? We exchange the truth about God for a lie because Satan's convinced us otherwise. We've got to watch out for that. You know, when I think about these verses, and I do realize, and Mark is exactly right, he's saying so much to these people about the world around them and not giving back into it and the hardships that they face with persecution and God's wrath will be on them. All those things are 100% true, but we still have to figure out how does this apply to us, because honestly, sometimes when we look at this, we've got to acknowledge the struggles that we face spiritually. Because it's still talking to us saying, don't give back in to the things that you struggle with. Don't listen to Satan and don't let him lie to you. I want you to be my child. I want you to follow me 100% of the time, realizing that I'm wise enough to have given you a word from 2,000 years ago and it still applies to you today. Every way, because God is that wise. He is our creator. He knows. Questions or comments?
It says right there, it says dishonoring their bodies among themselves. And it's easy to forget because when God created us, He gave us free will. But even though He gave us free will, we are designed for a purpose. And especially in the society we live in today, it's easy to almost try to fit the mold of being a Christian into what you want your life to be, instead of kind of working it in there. And forget that the amount of requirements God has for us just to get us to heaven.
You know, I'll be honest, I've never paid attention to that statement of how it was talking about dishonoring our bodies. But didn't God design you perfectly for His purpose? And whenever we go against that purpose, are we dishonoring our bodies? Dishonoring who He made us to be to fulfill our own selfishness? Great point, that we have to realize what God made us to be and who He made us to be. In verses 26 and 27, for this reason God gave them up to dishonorable passions. Notice what it says in both of these verses. It begins, therefore God gave them up to the lust of their hearts. Then the next one says, for this reason God gave them up to dishonorable passion. He allowed them to do this. You know, there's so many things I truly believe that God works within our life as long as we're wanting to be His children. I think He continues to work in our life until we get to a point it's like, God, I really like this way more. And I think at that point He gives us up. Fine. I'm trying to pull you back in. I'm trying to do these things. But if you don't want that, if you're refusing my help, fine, I'm going to let you give in. How many times have you struggled with temptation and found yourself not giving into it, and you sit back and you think, why in the world? Because I wanted to. I wanted to give into that. I wanted that. And for some reason, I didn't follow through, and I don't even know why.
Sometimes I think the consequences behind our sins are not instant. Sometimes we turn a blind eye to it because it's not going to happen to us right then, or at least we think.
Yeah, and I think we can learn that through Adam and Eve. Even though there were some consequences, it was the death consequence they were afraid of most. But God really didn't mean it. He's not going to kill you. They were kicked out of the garden. She had pain in childbirth. He had to work the land. There were things that happened, but was it all that bad? No, now we know right from wrong. We get to know things that God knows, and we're almost justified. It's okay. Look, it's happening to everybody else too. We're just kind of living life like everybody else is. Because there's not an immediate or harsh enough consequence, we just think, God's obviously must be okay with this. And we don't. We don't look at it that way. Listen to what it says. For their women exchanged natural relations for those that are contrary to nature. And the men likewise gave up their natural relations with women and were consumed with passions for one another. Men committing shameless acts with men and receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error. What is he talking about? What sin is he talking about here? Homosexuality. So many people will say, God doesn't talk about that. He does. And honestly, it's one of those things that was a big deal, not only in Rome and Corinth and other places where homosexuality existed and honestly was rampant in different places. And he's saying, that's shameful. That's wrong. God didn't design you that way. That goes against everything that should be natural to you. Lonnie Jones, a psychologist, a counselor, he explains and scientifically shows that nobody is made to be a homosexual. There are three things, and I wish I could name all three of them, but since I can't, I won't list them. There are three things that typically cause somebody to feel that way. And so over time, they convince themselves that that is the way that they are. One, I'll see what I can do. I think I know them. One is that they've been abused as a child or somewhere along the way. They are so sexually driven, they can't find enough satisfaction in the things that they do that they continue to seek it in all forms and methods. And there are some that are looking for some type of connection with people, and when they can't find it in certain ways as they grow up, they find it in the same sex to where people will convince themselves, well, these are the only ones that will accept me. And so they convince themselves that they want to be such a part of that. And those are the three areas of why people believe that they are. And when you get to that point of saying, this is just who I am, God has to be okay with it. Because all of a sudden they convince themselves if they want to be spiritual at all, God has to love me because that's how he made me. But there's nothing scientifically that shows that that would have happened. I'm going to quickly go through the rest of these because Bobby needs to ring the bell. And since he did not see fit to acknowledge God, since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, gave them up to the debased mind to do what ought not to be done. For they were filled with all manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, malice. They were full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, and ruthless. Just quickly, as you look through that list, sometimes all we look at is the murderer on there. I hadn't killed anybody, I'm good. But almost all those other ones, have we not struggled with at some point in time in our life? It does. And how much we have almost kind of given into parts of that from here and there and kind of justified the feelings we have because of emotions that I feel, whether I covet things or whether I'm malicious towards somebody or I want to deceive somebody or I'm a gossip or I slander people. I'm haughty and boastful. I'm disobedient to my parents. I'm foolish. I'm faithless because I won't take steps of faith. I'm heartless toward other people. Sometimes I'm even ruthless. We find ourselves in different ones of these places sometimes, don't we?
I want to go back to those verses because our society is making us accept the homosexuality. The religious bodies are accepting them. I understand that we're supposed to accept someone and try to teach them. I get that. They walk in the door, we try to teach them the sin. But when you start accepting those things, and when we've got to stand stronger against those things, be willing to say, no, God does not allow that. That's wrong, whatever that may be. But that's one of those issues. Some of these others, haters, everybody says, oh yeah, you shouldn't hate, no, you shouldn't murder. Everybody agrees with that for the most part, religious bodies and everything. But this homosexuality thing's been pushed on us to where we have got to accept it, or we're going to be like those people. We're going to be persecuted as a religious body because we already are. If you get up and publicly say this potentially that we'll have lawsuits against us. We can't cow down to those things, and it's going to be a hard battle. It's only going to get worse. Bestiality's right around the corner.
Yeah. Everything's accepted. When does it never stops because, hey, that's just how they're made. I mean, you can't draw a line at some point except where God draws it.
Transgender, I mean, that's
transgender, pedophiles, anything. You can't draw a line any longer. If you acknowledge one and say we have to accept them, you really have to accept it all. And obviously, we as Christians shouldn't do that. Last verse, and go ahead and ring the bell, Bobby. I know you need to, because it goes along with what Mark just said. For they know God's righteous decree that those who practice such things deserve to die. All these people that we've just listed, they deserve eternal damnation. But listen to what it says. They not only do them, but they give approval to those who practice it. Just what Mark's saying. When we sit back and we say, it's okay, you continue to live that life, no matter what sin it is. When we say it's okay to continue down the evil path that leads to eternal damnation, we're wrong when we approve it. Yes, we should always take people for where they are, but we can't forget who we are because we got to help them get to where they need to go, to be a child of God. Our job is to take them because we're all sinners. They're going to have sin in their life. But if we don't help them to acknowledge that sin, to say, hey, God expects more out of you. What do you need to get help through this? Then what are we going to do? We've got to make sure we're not acknowledging and helping them to justify the sin in their life. Thank you.